A hurricane shatters a wooden giant beneath the waves. This is the story of the Spanish galleon Nuestra Señora de Atocha, a shipwreck that did not just vanish in 1622, but actively rewrote the future. By the end, you will understand how a single sunken treasure ship tilted the global balance of power and set a legal precedent that echoes today. What secret did its cargo hold that could bankrupt an empire? How did its loss help shape the world map we know now? What do you believe is the true price of a nation's lost fortune? Built for glory, but destined for the deep, the Nuestra Señora de Atocha was more than a ship. It was a floating bank vault for an empire. As the heavily armed guard galleon of the Tierra Firme fleet, its sole purpose was to transport the annual treasure haul from the Americas back to Spain. That year, its wooden hull strained under a weight of wealth that is almost impossible to comprehend today. Stacked in its hold were 1,200 silver bars, over 180,000 silver coins, and a fortune in gold. There were also chests filled with uncut emeralds from the mines of Colombia and priceless artifacts crafted by indigenous hands, all destined for the Spanish crown. This was not merely luxury, it was the lifeblood of a global superpower. The year was 1622, and Spain was mired in the sprawling conflict of the 30 Years' War, a fight for religious and political dominance across Europe. The Atocha's treasure was the war chest, the crucial funding needed to pay armies and secure alliances. The survival of the empire's ambitions literally rested on this ship making it home. But the sea had other plans. As the fleet sailed north through the Florida Straits, it was ambushed by a ferocious hurricane. The Atocha, its sails torn and hull battered, was driven onto a reef and swallowed by the waves in a matter of minutes. Of the 265 people on board, only 5 survived by clinging to the mizzenmast. The rest, sailors, soldiers, nobles, and slaves, were lost to the storm. In an instant, an unimaginable fortune and hundreds of lives vanished beneath the churning water. The loss was a financial earthquake that shook the foundations of the Spanish Empire. The gold and silver that would never reach the treasury created a crippling deficit, weakening its ability to wage war and ultimately diminishing its power on the world stage. A single storm had not only sunk a ship, it had begun to sink an empire. The news of the Atocha's loss sent shockwaves through Havana. Within days, Spanish salvage ships were racing back to the disaster site, armed with the most advanced recovery tool of the 17th century, the diving bell. These were crude, dangerous contraptions, an open-bottomed bell lowered by ropes, trapping a pocket of air for a diver to breathe. The task fell to enslaved and indigenous pearl divers, men forced to plunge into the murky, shark-infested waters. They worked in terror, descending into the dark, feeling their way along the seabed, their lungs burning as they tried to grasp silver bars from the wreckage. They faced not just the ocean's dangers, but the constant threat of the bends, a painful and often fatal condition from rising too quickly that no one at the time understood. Despite their bravery and suffering, the Spanish recovered only a tiny fraction of the treasure. The main pile, the motherlode, had been swept away by the storm and buried under centuries of sand, its location becoming one of history's most enduring maritime mysteries. That mystery would lie dormant for nearly 350 years, until a man named Mel Fisher became obsessed. He was a modern-day treasure hunter, a dreamer with relentless determination. For 16 long years, he and his family combed the seafloor off the Florida Keys, battling financial ruin, legal challenges, and unbearable tragedy. The search claimed the lives of his son Dirk, his daughter-in-law Angel, and a diver when their boat capsized one dark night. Yet through it all, Fisher maintained an unshakable belief, rallying his team each morning with the same famous shout, "Today is the day." And then, on July 20th, 1985, it finally was. After a search spanning more than a decade and a half, one of his divers radioed up from the bottom. The seabed, he reported, was paved with silver bars. They had found it. The euphoria of that moment was the culmination of a quest that had cost everything, a modern odyssey that finally located the lost fortune of the Atocha. The discovery was not just a pile of treasure, it was the resurrection of a ghost, a king's ransom of silver, gold, and emeralds that had been lost to the world. But this incredible find immediately sparked a new battle, one not fought with diving bells or metal detectors, but with lawyers and legal briefs. Who did this sunken fortune truly belong to? That sunken treasure did more than fill the ocean floor with silver. It created a massive financial hole in the Spanish treasury. Without that influx of wealth, the Spanish crown found itself in an impossible position. It could not pay the vast armies of mercenaries fighting across Europe in the 30 Years' War, and it could not service its enormous debts to international bankers. The empire was essentially bankrupt, its military power hamstrung by a simple lack of funds. This single shipwreck did not just represent a lost fortune, it represented a lost war. Spain's influence began to wane, its grip on European affairs loosening with every bill it could no longer pay. Into this power vacuum sailed its rivals. Nations like England and the Dutch Republic, which had long been challenging Spanish dominance, saw their opportunity. With Spain weakened, they could expand their own colonial empires, secure more trade routes, and fund their own navies without the same level of opposition. The balance of power in Europe and across the Atlantic world began a decisive tilt. Think of it as a grand-scale chessboard, where the loss of one critical piece, the Atocha's treasure, forced a player into a defensive position from which they never fully recovered. This shift did not just redraw the map of Europe, it redrew the map of the entire world. Spanish influence receded in the Americas, while English and Dutch colonies grew in size and number. The cultural and political landscape of North and South America was fundamentally shaped by this transfer of power. So the next time you look at a world map, consider the invisible currents of history. The borders of nations, the languages spoken across continents, even the global alliances of today, were all subtly influenced by a hurricane that sank one ship over 400 years ago. But the story of the Atocha was not over. Its rediscovery in the 20th century would spark a different kind of battle, one fought not with cannons and ships, but in the courtroom. The question of ownership over a sunken king's ransom ignited a legal war that stretched all the way to the United States Supreme Court. On one side stood Mel Fisher, the treasure hunter who had sacrificed so much to find the Atocha. On the other stood the state of Florida, which claimed the treasure was found in its waters and therefore belonged to the public. The core of their dispute hinged on two ancient maritime laws. The law of salvage rewards a salver for rescuing property at sea, essentially paying them for their effort and risk. The law of fines, however, is much simpler. It awards ownership to whoever discovers the property and can prove it was abandoned. The state argued for salvage, meaning Fisher would get a fee, but not the treasure itself. Fisher argued for fines, insisting the Spanish had abandoned the wreck centuries ago, making the treasure finders keepers. This was not a minor technicality. It was a fight over hundreds of millions of dollars and the very principle of discovery. For years, the case wound through the legal system, a costly battle of briefs and appeals that threatened to consume the treasure itself in legal fees. The tension was immense, a modern-day duel fought with legal precedent instead of swords. Finally, the Supreme Court ruled. In a landmark decision, the justices sided with Mel Fisher. They affirmed that the Atocha's treasure was indeed abandoned property, and under the law of fines, it belonged to him and his team. This ruling did more than just make a few treasure hunters rich. It established a legal precedent that continues to echo across the world's oceans. It created a clear, though controversial, framework for how sunken historical treasures are treated, directly encouraging commercial salvage operations by promising them the potential of full ownership. This precedent sits at the heart of a persistent ethical conflict. On one hand, it rewards the immense risk, cost, and innovation required to locate these lost chapters of history. On the other, many archaeologists and historians worry it prioritizes profit over preservation, as the commercial need to recover and sell valuable artifacts can sometimes come at the cost of the careful, scientific study that unpacks a wreck's full historical story. The Atocha's silver bars were not just cargo, they were data. Their stamps revealed trade routes, their weight indicated economic standards, and their very presence on the seabed told a story of imperial ambition and tragic failure. The legal victory that brought them to the surface also guaranteed that the final chapter of the Atocha would be written not just by historians, but by lawyers and salvors, proving that a shipwreck story is never truly over, even after 400 years. So the wreck of the Atocha was far more than a sunken treasure chest. It was a pivot point, a single event on the seabed that sent ripples through history, altering the fate of nations and the very laws of the sea. Its loss drained the Spanish treasury at a critical moment, crippling its ability to fund a continental war and accelerating the decline of a global empire. That shift in power opened the door for its rivals, reshaping the world map and the cultural destinies of the Americas. Centuries later, its rediscovery ignited a legal revolution, a Supreme Court battle that established who owns the past and set the precedent for modern treasure hunting, a debate that continues today between recovery and preservation. It is a profound reminder that history is not just made in palaces and on battlefields, but in the silent, crushing depths. A single storm, one ship, can change everything. We are left to wonder, what if the Atocha had sailed safely into port? How different might our world look if that fortune had reached the Spanish king? The echoes of that single what if have lasted for 400 years. What historical what if captures your imagination? Share your own in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this journey to the ocean floor, subscribe for more stories where history and mystery collide.